This morning and also next Saturday, we're going to be looking into exploring the topic of opening the door to not knowing. Not knowing is something that the mind often feels uncomfortable with. We've been conditioned, haven't we all, to believe we should know. We should know. But could any one of us say what's going to happen tomorrow? Or even later on in this hour? I don't know, But to get comfortable with not knowing is a challenge. It's a challenge for the mind that wants to stay safe and secure and know what's going to happen and know what I should know and how I should act and so forth and so on. So we're not looking at not knowing in opposition to anything. It's not in opposition to knowing. But what I'm talking about is really opening ourselves to that deeper dimension of yourself, really, your true self. Where there is a reservoir, we might say, of wisdom and intelligence and creativity and inspiration and compassion and love. And so to think that we already know is to close the door often to that particular dimension of ourselves, which is really the source of the whole show, the source of our lives, the source of life itself, the source of being. And if you've read or experienced yourself, in any field, whether it's athletics or mathematics or physics or spiritual innovations through the centuries or dancing or poetry or art, any one of those and many, many more, those peak moments, the moments where we're inspired by the painting or the poem or the athletic performance, or if you yourself have those moments, you know that there's a sense of flow, there's a sense of really something falling away, some separation falling away, and you're just completely present and aligned with the moment, not separate from the moment. And these are the moments that inspire us, even if we don't know that that's the inspiration, there is a sense of something happening that for many people feels unexpected and feels like, I don't know where it came from. And these are moments that are available to any of us when we open the door to not having to already know. Now, in the case, for instance, of science or athletics or art, there's a training of the mind, training of the talent and so forth. But then there are those moments, a singer could have voice lessons for many, many, many years, but then there's a performance and they'll say, it just came. It just was here. I wasn't doing it. I had a woman come to me many years ago for spiritual mentoring, I guess you'd say, Dokusan in my tradition, but nonetheless, she was a dancer. She was a professional dancer, and she was in the middle of a tour jeté or whatever the name would be, of leaping through the air. And suddenly for her, she wasn't there. There was just dancing. There wasn't somebody who was dancing. There was just dancing. And it was a beautiful moment for her, but also really confusing. Like, what happened? I wasn't there. And so these are moments of no separate self. It doesn't mean we don't have an expression, that we don't have our own unique individual way of being, the wholeness of being as ourselves, as what we've taken to be ourselves. But there are so many things that words and labels and judgments and opinions and ideas, they'll never, ever be able to capture. One example just in my life during this pandemic, as probably is true for many of you, I haven't actually gone too far afield during this past year plus, but I do take walks when I can in my neighborhood, and there are a few houses down the block that have rose bushes in front of their houses. Now, some of you may not be familiar, but in San Francisco, we don't really have front yards for the most part. Houses are very close together, but there might be little plots of earth in front. And a few people have yards in the back, but not like you would see in some places. But at any rate, these houses have rose bushes in front. And they're all in bloom right now. It's spring and they're beautiful. But there's one rose bush that I absolutely love, and I have to stop by this one rose bush every time I pass it, because the roses there have the most beautiful, sweet, powerful presence of a fragrance that is kind of overwhelming to my heart, I guess you'd say. I just, anyway, even when we were wearing masks all the time, which apparently beginning this week in the United States, we don't have to if we're fully vaccinated, at least not everywhere. But I would pull my little mask down, and put my nose right in the middle of one of these roses and just, inhale this incredible fragrance. But then I would walk on and, 2 seconds later, the fragrance was gone. And there's no way that a concept or a label or a description could possibly recreate that experience in my mind, or my experience, or in yours. And there's so many things like that. I mean, fragrance is one of them, the smell of cut grass, the smell of baking bread. I mean, as you know, I mean, the menu in a restaurant does not nurture us, right? We can't get nurture from the words on a menu. The thought of water doesn't quench our thirst. And likewise, the thought of enlightenment or awakening does not produce the experience. So in order to really have the experience, we have to begin to recognize, if we're interested, that the direct experience of anything is not the idea we have of it. It's not the label that we've put on it. It's not the thought we have it. It's not the judgment about whether we like it or we don't like it. It's something that's bare. The direct experience is like approaching something or looking at something or listening to something completely nakedly, we might say, without the additions of this, that, or the other thing. But most of us live in this virtual world, this intellectual world, where we think that the word is the thing. If you ask, you realize the word tree is not the tree. But so often we just slam the door on the full experience of our lives because we're living in this just world of thought, the world of description, of process, of analysis, of interpretation, and so forth. We're not making any of that wrong. There's a place for that kind of knowing, but it isn't the deepest knowing. And it certainly is not particularly helpful if you have spiritual longings, if you really, really want to know the truth of who or what you are. What is love? What is truth? What is the nature of anything, really? Can we look without already knowing? So we have to step beyond the intellect for this kind of experience. And, through the ages, many, many people have spoken about it or written about not knowing. In Zen in particular, there's a whole type of Korean Zen, which is very much focused on don't know mind. And one of its leaders these days, Sun Song, is noted to say on many occasions, I don't teach Buddhism, I only teach don't know. And some of you are familiar with Suzuki Roshi, who wrote Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And, he said, the empty mind is available for anything. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's, very few. And Thich Nhat Hanh is another Zen master who said something interesting many years ago. He said, there's something more important than ideas. There's something more important than ideas. And that is freedom from ideas. Freedom from ideas. Are you ever free from ideas? We're not making ideas wrong, but just that there's a dimension of your mind, your heart. It's open mind, open heart. there's a dimension here that doesn't depend on ideas, labels, intellect, memory, to be fully, fully here, fully present. So it's not just in the Zen tradition that Don't Know Mind has been written about. Some of you may be familiar with a Middle Ages text, The Cloud of Unknowing, written by an anonymous monk, Christian monk. But though he used theistic terms, he said, we cannot think our way to God. God can be loved, but not thought. With an empty mind and an open heart, let yourself be naked before grace. With an empty mind and an open heart, let yourself be naked before grace. Now, someone like Ramana Maharshi says the whole of life is grace, Grace is abundant. Grace, there's an ocean of grace, but it really depends on how much we receive, depends on the size of the container we take. It's like if you took a thimble to the ocean water, to the ocean of grace, you would only feel like you got a little bit. But to expand the sense of what you are and who you are, and being itself, being what you are, then perhaps the whole of life in some ways is grace. And then the third patriarch of Zen, has a long, long poem. Some of you are familiar with, perhaps, but there's a line in there: if you wish to know the truth, simply cease to cherish opinions. If you wish to know the truth, cease to cherish opinions. And it's not to say that opinions aren't going to arise, but it's our attachment to them that creates the division. Anytime we try to speak about something, we're a step removed from the direct experience, aren't we? We may be laughing, or we may be crying, or we may be loving. And the minute we start to try to put words to it, the experience itself becomes less potent, less immediate. So Don't Know Mind is always a here and now thing. And like I say, it's not opposed to knowing, but it does open the door to a deeper knowing and a deeper intimacy, and wisdom, really, and love, including suffering. There's a deeper opening to suffering as well. And out of that deeper opening, a response can come that's not based on what we think should be happening. People who have rushed into burning buildings and saved people, almost to a person, they'll say, I didn't think about it. I just knew I had to do it. And I know all of us have had moments like that where we're, we're maybe thinking about something, but then there's that deeper knowing. And those are when the door is opened for that to come forth, for that deep knowing to come forth that isn't based on memory. It's not based on what we remember or necessarily even what we like. But there's something that guides us from that mystery, really, from the deep self. So Don't Know Mind has been called many things. I've used several terms already, but just for a few, it's the direct experience of anything. And it can be a direct experience even of a memory, as long as we're not attaching to the interpretation of it. But a direct experience of any of the senses, right? Open mind, open heart. In Buddhist terminology, prajna is heart, mind connected as one. Beginner's mind, as I spoke about on Suzuki Roshi. The Tibetans will use terms like clear mind or clear space. But it's a mind that's not attached to concepts or definitions. And it's always encountering a moment here and now. Here and now. That's really the only space in which we're truly awake, is just here and now, in this eternal now. It's not like a little moment of time. It's what, in a sense, holds time, holds the construct of time and space. So we're stepping beyond the intellect to encounter something completely nakedly. So I want to invite you to perhaps experience a few things in this fashion right now. And to see without a concept doesn't mean that a thought won't appear, but what I want to invite you to do right now is just to pick anything in the room in which you find yourself. Pick anything to look at, to gaze gently. Just gaze gently on the object, whatever it is, and see if you can see it. Even if a thought arises, see if you can see it without going to the concept, without going to the narrative, without going to I like it or I don't like it, it's beautiful, it's ugly, any of those things, without adding anything. Because for this type of seeing, thought is not required. So as much as possible, just be still inside yourself in this looking, and let the discursive mind remain as silent as possible. Because actually thought does not see. Thought does not see. Something sees that thought is occurring, but the thought itself is not the seeing. So just gaze gently, innocently at whatever you've chosen. And let that image come to you. Let yourself receive it, and receive it as fully as possible with your whole body. You can become aware of the shape, the texture, the energy, the light, the color, just as much as possible. Let yourself be totally present to this one thing right now. And just stay with it for a bit. And do you sense any kind of sense of curiosity or wonder or surprise or even awe, perhaps? We're just quietly taking in, receiving what's in front of us. So stay open-minded, open-hearted. Imagine that you're a child just seeing this for the very first time. You don't have a word for it, but you're fascinated. You're learning about the world. You're learning about this that you're looking at just by looking at it, just by feeling, sensing, allowing it to reveal itself, to reveal its essence, to come into you, be part of you, not as something separate, but as that which is seeing itself in this form, in this here and now moment. You are free right now to just be awake. You know, if you've ever been present at a birth, just the head of a baby may have come into the world, and already there's a looking around. There's a taking in, an awareness. Let yourself have that experience of right now, this, innocently. Don't know, don't need to know a word, but here it is. So even if words come, just be willing not to know. And so I'm not going to speak just for a few moments, and let this, whatever it is you're gazing at, reveal itself to you, perhaps reveal its essence to you. Wordlessly. So a couple more questions. Can you, in any way, outside of the thought, separate your awareness from what you're seeing? Is it possible? And when you remember that what you deeply are is what's awake right now, there's a sense of oneness. We can't separate what's aware from what it is aware of. It's as if there is a mirror that simply reflects the moment as it is, if we have eyes to see. So I'd like to take a moment and perhaps share a bit of our experience for me in this exercise of awareness, we might say, or the mystery took the shape of a pink peony. I have a bouquet of peonies on my dining room table, which is where where my computer is set up at the moment. But I'd love to hear from any of you what your experience was. And you can either wave your hand and maybe Sarah will find you, or you can use that hand button she was talking about. Just love to have anyone share.
Just to say, if If you wave your hand, I may not see you because I can't see everyone. But if you use the raise hand button that you can find at the bottom of the screen, then I will see you.
Okay, I've put myself on gallery view, so I can see more of you at least.
Catherine, I'm going to open your microphone. Please go ahead. Actually, you need to press the unmute because I can only ask to unmute. Yes, exactly.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Dorothy. Thank you. That was it was a really interesting exercise for me, and I found there was a lot of efforting for me. Can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yeah, I can. Mm-hmm.
So I had my glasses that were just on the table in front, and the busyness of what they do, and all of the functions and all of those things was really quite loud and quite busy, and I kept trying, so that's the effort bit. Trying to just see the reflection or the color in a kind of different way, but it feels that there's just a lot of that way of seeing things that's just so deeply embedded. But when you actually came to the end part, when you said, could I see the difference between awareness and what's being seen, that felt as though I less separate, if that makes any sense.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you're speaking about how we're all trained,
Yeah.
The mind has been trained from our earliest learnings, what something is, what its function is, whether we like it or we don't like it, on and on and on. But then there's a deeper seeing, that doesn't depend on any of that. And if you really, go ahead.
And it's the really wanting to kind of just see from that but all of that, the history stuff of all that knowing, it's hard to kind of push that aside somehow.
Well, we don't have to necessarily push it aside. It's just that we're not required to give it our attention.
Yeah.
It's there, and most of us are attending to our thoughts way more than we're attending to the reality of the moment. And this is especially true in human relationships, which I want to talk about more on Saturday. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad that moment of, is what's aware really, can we ever separate it from what is in the field? And when you begin to get that, it's like you realize that the whole world is happening inside you. Inside your awareness, inside what's awake in each of us. If you're outside on a clear night and you see billions of stars in the night sky, where is that happening? Mm-hmm. In you, in your awareness. I mean, even if we're not looking at some kind of spiritual opening to being the whole thing, the oneness, still it's happening in you. There's a chemical and electrical and cellular process that's operating, right? Or we wouldn't be able to see, hear, think, talk, taste, touch, so forth. So even if your idea of yourself is confined to what you think of as a separate body mind, still experience is happening inside. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So is there a world out there? We don't have to get into a philosophical, conversation about that, but really to just begin to see that this that's awake contains anything and everything.
Yeah. And I just before I logged on, I'd been out in the woods and on a beauty and in nature that and I keep trying to practice that, just keep bringing that that it is all there.
Yeah, great. Yeah, nature is a beautiful place to really feel more that oneness, right? Because, and I think it's because, in part, because, you know, the trees, the flowers, the earth, they're not demanding anything of us. You know, we can just be, right? We can be along with the being. We are that nature in those moments. We are not just part of it, but we are at one with it. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
I'd love to hear from one or two more of you, what your experience perhaps was.
And we have Phil. Please go ahead.
Okay, there's Philip. Hi.
Hi, Dorothy. Sorry, I lost my my whole Zoom window went to the corner.
I can see you now.
Yeah, I can see you and everyone as well. I had a different experience, which is also a familiar experience, in that I was looking at my cell phone here, and it was very easy and natural to just kind of take it in separate from any thoughts or associations I have with it, which I have a lot of thoughts and associations with my cell phone and all the apps and emails and text and stuff, alarms, and just being with this object and the shape, the color, the feeling, it was a natural thing. It was very relaxing. Then when you ask the question about awareness, then I start thinking like I start feeling like there's some kind of like Jedi mind trick I should be able to get. like, oh yeah, it's all happening in me, like what you were just saying just a moment ago. It's always happening. Everything's always it's always experienced. Just experienced.
Yeah.
And yet when I like there's some movement when there's the question there of like applying something to like, oh, like where is it? What is it? Like and why don't I always know that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, who would be the one that would always know it? That comes back to the question of who or what am I?
Yeah.
The one that wants to always know it. Something already does.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you were moving your hands in this beautiful way a moment ago, you know, and there was a knowing of that movement, was there not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was just happening.
It was just happening, like the rest of life, frankly. But yeah, it was just happening. Some of you may be on Rupert Spire's mailing list. I don't know, but there was an email that came this past week, about some event that he was doing, and there was a quote at the top, which I thought was quite brilliant. I mean, many things he says seem to me to be very brilliant. He's unbelievably adept at putting into words things that are difficult. But anyway, this quote I wrote down. He said, "Thought gives experience its name. The senses give it its form, but the light of pure knowing gives it its reality." And that pure knowing is not the intellectual knowing. It's not the knowing from memory. It's what you were talking about. We were just talking about. There was a knowing of this happening, you know, that was just happening. And now we could call that, this was, you know, something was aware, right?
Yes.
and we can ask the deeper questions about that, knowing, like, for all of us, there's something that appears to be continuous about us from early days, right? Do you know? When we were 2, when we were 5, we were 10, we were 15, we were 25, we were 50, we were 75, and going up in my case from there. Do you know? But everything has changed. The cells have changed. Our ideas have changed. Our body has changed. Our thoughts and feelings are continually changing. Sensations coming and going every moment. What's continuous? What gives you the sense of continuity? What doesn't seem to come and go?
Yeah, there is something that's constant.
Yeah. And the minute we try to put a name on it, we're going to limit it. So we don't have to. We don't have to. I mean, we can call it awareness, awakeness, true nature, Buddha nature, Christ consciousness, la, 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 la. We can use a lot of names, but none of those are it. But that's something, yeah. There's
something that comes here that's like, oh, but I need to, like, I need to know, like,
exactly.
I need to label it. I need to know. I need to categorize, like when I want to do something and my mom would say, why? like it needs to make sense.
Yeah, as a kid, a lot of times, well, maybe even now, you don't know why, right?
Yeah.
You just did it. It just happened. And we all want to know why, and a lot of times we'll lie. I'm not saying you are one of those people, but we'll lie just to have a reason, Someone asks you to do something, you're not moved to do it, and then you make up a reason why you can't, rather than, I'm not moved to do that. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah.
That sort of thing where we come back to what's true in the moment for ourselves. And yes, the mind wants to know. And so when it comes to awakening, regardless of the essential existential question that we all might have, my hunch is that we all will come, if we investigate deeply enough, we will all come to, I don't know. Now, can we remain there?
Yeah. And I liked what you said about nature, because like you said, it's not asking anything of us, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Why do we feel so free when we're out in the woods, or in the ocean? We're connecting with that deeper essence of ourself, really. And we're seeing ourselves in that form. But yeah, the I don't know, like in there's a practice, and we could all maybe do this if you like for a few minutes. On the inhale, let's do this. We'll just open it to this dimension right away. So I might invite you to close your eyes and just become aware of your breathing. So the inhalation and the exhalation. And just allow it to be whatever it is. Inhaling, exhaling. And now with each inhalation, I want to invite you to ask the question silently to yourselves. What am I? Inhale. What am I? On the exhale, I don't know. Inhale, what exhale. Don't know. Just let's do that together for a few minutes. What am I? Don't know. And maybe in 5 minutes I'll invite a bell to ring and we'll come back to discuss. So did any of you have experience where the question ceased? Just couldn't ask the question anymore. John is nodding his head. Do you want to speak about it? You can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Can you hear me there?
I can.
Good. First of all, it's just a delight to be with you again, Dorothy. It's been 10 years since I was with you in Vajrapani.
Oh my goodness.
Oh.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed after probably halfway through the 5 minutes that the question became, well, the question disappeared in the sense that I became aware of awareness. You know, I was aware of the sounds and when a breeze came through, I was aware of the way it felt. It was cool, and so simply, I was just aware of awareness itself. And I think the first exercise did the same thing. You know, I was looking at a little sculpture here that I've got, and I was kind of playing with it as a child. Like it's actually it's a sculpture of a bear. It's a soapstone. But I was kind of, I can imagine being a child just playing with something, you know, like I wanted to touch its ears and like to feel it. And I even tried like kids put things in their mouth. I tried that. It didn't work. It didn't. But
I once did that with an orchid. I was so engaged with an orchid, and the little tongue of the orchid was in, and I just had to taste it. Go ahead.
Again, I was aware of being aware of looking, looking and feeling, and then when I came back to gallery view, it's like I wanted to do that with the faces of all the people, and it's strictly taboo to touch them and to touch their ears.
Well, that's the intimacy, isn't it?
Yeah.
The natural intimacy when we're not overlaying the moment with a lot of ideas and judgments and whatnot. Yeah, it's as you describe. And it feels like those were moments, you know, when the question ceases, it is possible that the questioner has ceased in those moments. It feels like that's what you're pointing us to.
Yeah.
Do you know that the questioner, the separate questioner, I mean, there's still this form called John, it's there, you know, speaking, and yet that which is separate wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's true for lots of things, you know, when the questioner ceases, the question ceases. When the doubter ceases, the doubt ceases, you know? So we come back time and time again to that most potent and, to me, most important question if we're interested in freedom, and that is, who or what are we really? Yeah.
And there's also a freshness in looking at things. Like I noticed that the mind is, if a novelty, something that's a novelty it hasn't seen before, there's there's much more attention, much more awareness. You know?
Yeah.
And I noticed that the temptation to name something takes away that, like seeing it for the first time, you know?
It's no longer fresh in that moment, as soon as we move to the labeling.
Yeah.
Exactly. And see, we're not making any of that wrong. It's just that there's a whole dimension of life that we're missing when we live so much of the time in the virtual reality created by the mind of thought.
Yeah. Yeah, and the temptation to say, "Oh, yeah, I already know what that is, so I don't need to pay attention to it anymore."
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. And we do it all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, you're in a wheelchair. Well, I know who you are. Oh, you're a Republican. I know who you are. Oh, you're a Democrat. I know you. Oh, you're from England. Oh, I know who you are. Oh, on and on and on. Do you know the presuppositions we have and that we place, you know, and that we could cling to, you know? It's not just that they arise, you know, opinions arising are not a problem. It's the grabbing onto them and feeling like that's really so. you know, that creates so much distance in our lives, in our world, and so forth, you know. So yeah, the freshness is lost as soon as we're trying to put it into categories.
Yeah.
And some people get great joy out of categories. I used to go hiking with a woman. She was a physician and a scientist, and she knew the name and the official name of every flower and tree on any walk we would take, you know. And she would, you know, and she loved that. I mean, that was part of how she was taking in the world. So I don't make that wrong. And she got great joy in that. But for me, you know, it was like, could we just look at the flower once without, you know, without the name and the genus and the whole bit, you know? But that's how we can honor our differences as well. You know, how is life showing itself through our particular vessels, we might say, you know, like that.
Yeah, there's a certain delight in being able to name something.
Sure.
You know, and I think delight itself is a real experience.
Absolutely. And I think about, you know, like if you've ever watched little kids grow up, and that, you know, they'll be little toddlers and they'll see themselves in the mirror, and that will be a baby in the mirror. And then the mom or dad says, no, that's you in the mirror. But before that, it wasn't, you know, the you was what was looking. You know, the reflection was not the you. The what was looking was the you. But then we're taught, oh no, that's you. And then, you know, even early on, you know, a kid will say, if their name is Johnny, let's call you Johnny for a moment. Johnny wants a cookie. And then your mom will say, no, the way you say it is, I want a cookie. And so we're taught from a very early age to have I and John,
Yeah,
you know, completely, you know, not separate. And of course, on the deepest level, they're not separate. They're not, you know, who we are and the I that we all claim. I don't care what language we speak, you know, we all use that pronoun I, but we think it's somebody separate.
yeah,
And perhaps it is not.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like I also noticed in the saying, I don't know, I saw that there's like, I'm sorry if this is becoming a discussion, but it's like I sense that as a child, to the mind saying, I don't know, grabbing onto an identity, I don't know, oh, I'm John. You know, it just kind of brings a comfort, but it also, I don't know, there's something comforting to the mind to have an answer to I don't know what I am. And to grab on, oh, I am a person, or I am John, I am, it's comforting to the mind at that stage, I think, you know.
Sure, of course it is. And you know, to bump up against the mystery that's behind I don't know, that's a very deep seeing. You know, it reveals itself not to the mind.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks, you know, some of you know that Ramana Maharshi has played a big role in my life. And of course, the main practice that he recommended was self-inquiry. Who am I? And if you stay with that question, and of course we had a version of it, what am I? If you stay with that question long enough, you will inevitably come to I don't know. And this is where people turn away from the practice, thinking that it's failed because it has not delivered an intellectual answer. Yeah, you know? Yeah. And so now it's time to go off to India, or to, you know, to have a different teacher, or to do a different practice or whatever, which is fine. I mean, that's life just happening as well. But the effect of self-inquiry is not an intellectual answer. And you're right, the mind feels comfortable when it can have one.
Yeah.
And I think, part of what so-called spiritual teaching can be about is giving the mind enough relaxation, that it can step out of the picture
Right.
for a moment now and then, so that something deeper can reveal itself, to itself. Because awakening is not an awakening of ego. It's an awakening that awakens to itself. And the mind that we call ego, the mind that thinks of itself as separate, that's what wants to know, and will effort greatly for however long we do. That's part of the game as well, it would appear. If I just sit long enough, if I just chant enough, if I just have enough teachers, if I just have a guru, then I will get it.
Yeah.
Right? We've all thought that, probably, if we're spiritual seekers. I will get it, right? If I just do it right. 30 years on the cushion facing the wall, whatever it is, I will get it.
Yeah.
And as you're pointing to, John, the mind does not let go until it sees its limitations.
Yeah. And again, I'm just talking for myself, with the fear that comes to the mind, or that the mind generates around not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a scary place. I don't know.
Yes.
But to relax into that.
Yes.
Because like the whole spiritual inquiry for me is around, there's been a lot of fear in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you mean? Everything,
sure.
Emptiness is form and form is emptiness. Holy shenanigans to the mind. Like it grasps that.
Sure. But, just in the question that I posed, can awareness ever be truly separated from what it sees or knows? That's the form and emptiness right there.
Yeah.
This that's awake and aware, it's empty. It's empty until something fills it. Yeah. If you're just looking right now at your screen, and the seeing itself, is kind of empty of any kind of quality except for illuminating what's in our field of awareness, And so there's that formless that's here as form, and vice versa. I can't see this peony in my vase here on my dining room table, unless something is reflecting it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's being reflected in the very thing that's knowing it. Anyway, I don't want to get too far afield with
that's
language.
Great.
Yeah, but thanks, John. Good to see you again. Yeah.
You too.
Yeah. Who else can I talk to for a moment or two?
I can see a hand from Lee. Lee, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hello.
Where are you, my dear? Can you wave your hand? Oh, okay. There you go. Hi.
Hi, Dorothy.
Hi.
I wanted to talk about the experience, the first practice we had where we were looking at something in the room. Mm-hmm. I was looking at a candle in a jar with a bow on top, and it was really nothing special. And then I started to notice the bow was very slightly waving in the breeze from the fan, and it was as if it was waving to me. Like sometimes when I see leaves blowing on the tree, it looks like they're waving to me. And hi, how are you? And so I was just together with the waving of the bow, and as you say, my gaze relaxed, and I suddenly realized there was no candle. It wasn't me being together or being present with the candle. That was just the being together, being present together, but no separate things being present. Exactly. If that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. There's a Zen poem, and I can't remember the author, but old guy, ancient poem. We sat the mountain and me until only the mountain remained. It's kind of like what you're describing,
The same thing when you rang the ringing of the gong or the bell. the same thing happened. There was no bell and no me. There was just the sensation of the
sound
ringing.
and sensation. Exactly. Lovely. Yeah. See, I mean, these are enlightened moments that we're having. You know, there's no enlightened me. There are enlightened moments, and those moments where we're not separate. Those are our awakened moments. You know. Yeah.
And very different than obviously looking at and labeling or defining what I'm seeing or looking for something.
Yes. Yeah, quite different.
You miss it if you're looking for it.
Right. And this is where, you know, even in our vision, and certainly in our listening, it's easier with listening in a sense because we don't have the same sense of going after, although occasionally we'll just like, what? But with vision, you know, to relax into a receiving it, it's quite different than going out after it, you know, and so much of our life is taken up with going after something, you know, whether it's truth or a relationship or a new job or, you know, whatever, you know, we're going out. But what is it like even for some moments of our day to just let life come in, you know, let it be received from this place of open mind, open heart. Yeah. And that's when you have that sense of intimacy, that sense of no separation, that sense of some separate self idea dropping away even momentarily.
You know, there seems to be a natural relaxing when we're here together and you give us instruction or guidance. There seems to be a willingness or an ability to open, whereas in everyday life, there seems to be more defensiveness about dropping open.
Yeah. I understand that. And we can take that defensive aspect a little deeper and ask whether or not what we most deeply are needs protection. You know, a lot of us have built walls around a heart, for instance. We've been hurt in relationships or early on or whatever, and so we're very defensive, and it's hard to let in love or hard to let in, you know, someone else and so forth and so on. But, you know, while it might have been required when we were little to have some defense just to survive for some of us, you can ask the question, does love actually need protection? Do you know? Who is it that needs to be protected? What is it that needs to be protected by our defenses? And as, you know, as we become more open, I mean, it's great, isn't it? I mean, when you're open to the vastness, you know, that's a lovely expanded feeling. But when openness starts to become operative in the body-mind, it feels vulnerable because the defenses are not operating in the same way that they used to. So it is a little scary at first to have fewer defenses. And of course, if we need them, they'll be there. But it's a question that we can ask. You know, what really needs protection here?
It's funny. As soon as you said we'll be vulnerable, the thought immediately occurred to me: don't go there.
Yeah.
But then I realized that.
Well, that's why we have defenses.
I realized that's a thought. That's not me.
That's the whole purpose for many of us of a defense is never to feel vulnerable again. But when you realize that there's something in you that's not threatened by that feeling, then there's a lot of freedom, you know? Well, I can feel this. Maybe it's not pleasant, but there's something that doesn't have to shy away from it. And then the more we include life as it is, in our ability to somehow direct the presence that's already here towards something that we might have felt we wish weren't here. But the more we can do that, the freer we become, and the more we resist, the more it persists. but to bring something back into the wholeness of being is all it, from my perspective anyway, that's all it wants. You know, it just wants to be part of the whole. So all these things that we've been pushing away, you know, what happens when I don't really know what that is. I think I do because I have an idea and I have a judgment about it. But what if I just turn my attention, my awareness right into that I'm hoping to get rid of? What if I'm not trying to get rid of it for a few moments and I'm just curious, like I was curious about the cell phone or curious about my glasses, you know, curious about the candle and the bow. You know. One other thing that your comments, Lee, reminded me of is this experience that we were inviting about looking at, gazing innocently at some object in the room. Those of you who have spoken about it, you know, have sometimes brought in two different aspects that are also part of meditation, if we want to call meditation a thing. But one, there are methods that focus on concentration, you know, really staying present to one thing, right? Concentration. But then there's also a global seeing, which is not the same. And yet they can happen simultaneously. You know, I can be aware of the flower in my room and also the entire rest of the room and all of you on the screen. You know, it's all here in this global awareness. And yet if it's like a camera, our attention is like a camera. So, you know, it can be a wide angle, global awareness, and then it can go pinpoint one thing, you know, when we're interested, when we're curious and so forth. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Thanks so much. Is there anybody else before we move along? Yeah, Sid.
Hey, Dorothy, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. My inquiry was kind of in the same vein that you were talking with Lee about, that it sort of feels now that there are two operating systems running here. There's the one that where there's just that doesn't change, that's always here, that's kind of an unconditional love and presence, and it's the one that kind of welcomes everything and connects. Mm-hmm. And there's the stillness and aliveness in that. And then there's the old operating system, which is kind of the protective system, the parts that protect from vulnerability. And then there's, you know, and it's generally one from, you know, childhood and teenage years, and then whatever contraction that's still left in the system, or if there are parts that I'm kind of a parts thinking guy. I facilitate something called internal family systems. It's a parts, so I talk that way, but it's like, you know, the traumatized parts. And so I'm curious, I'm dealing with the kind of the reconciliation, or perhaps for the protective, for the old operating system, how to kind of update it or let it just the reassurance that it gets from this, that it's being met, that's really unconditional love. It's the space that's here now. But it's sometimes I end up still blending back into the old system, or fearful protective parts that want to protect from vulnerability. And I'm curious how that worked in you as far as that kind of integration and the old meeting the new.
Well, I would ask you a question. I mean, I'm happy to speak more about it, but I would ask the question, like, what knows that something has returned to the old operating system?
Well, there's an awareness of contraction that'll show up.
Yes.
Fear, like, oh my God, what are people thinking of me as I speak on this Zoom and play with my hands? Mm-hmm. And so there's an awareness of that. There's this awareness of, you know, like a sense of a connector part that wants it to look good. And so that's just there's an awareness of that.
Yeah. And does that awareness judge it, that you have a fear of?
Oh, no. I mean, from the space of spacious awareness, there's absolutely no judgment of it. Yet right now, like, spacious awareness is pretty big. And so those parts are just kind of felt like they're way away. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of the center of gravity will continue to move. And sometimes it will move where those parts will be like, whoa, we need to be careful, or we need to be protective.
Mm-hmm. And if you understand on a deep level that those are just happening, and there's not somebody separate that's attached to that, you know, the identification is not there, even if the contraction is there, then there's a different relationship to it. You know, I mean, I love the way you use your hands, so I'm going to use mine in response. So if you can imagine that my two arms are just a single thing, okay, you know, like even though they look like there's two, but it's really not. So, you know, the side you're talking about, that's open, expansive, non-judging, present, loving, compassionate, let's call that, you know, one hand. And here's the relative, here's the absolute, okay? And here's the relative. Constantly moving, you know, sometimes old stuff, memories will appear, you know, feelings, thoughts, it's safe, it's not safe, blah, 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 you know. And we think that somehow there's a me that has to integrate these two, you know, that there's an action or an efforting that's required. But it might not be so much that efforting as just a really gentle allowing of all of this to be touched by what's never been separate from it. Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to get rid of all of these. My mind says, oh, this is uncomfortable, da, 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 da. And yet awareness can go anywhere. It has no barriers. It has no, you know, yeah, it can, it's totally free and it's not threatened. And so just even as you know, as you already know this dimension of yourself, you know, what is it like to let this come and be touched? Do you know? And the more we're allowing it to be touched, the more resourced we can feel. Do you know? I mean, resourcing is very important in terms of working with trauma, but there's a resource that's with us 24/7. Do you know? Because it can't be separated. Do you know? And so what's it like, you know, to let it be touched and then get curious? What's this made of? This fear, this contraction, what is it made of? Rather than how do I get rid of it? You know, what is that? What is that? I don't know. What is this? I don't know. What is this? I don't know. And then it begins to reveal itself as kind of empty of definition, empty of self. Is it pleasant? No. Contractions are not pleasant, you know? And yet, if there's no separate somebody who's doing life wrong and who's so screwed up because of it, and who's this and that and the other thing, all the ways that we've identified as somebody separate, then it's just the thing itself in the moment that it is. And we can look into that or feel into it without pushing it away, you know, depending. And sometimes we will push it away, you know. Nice. The mind will have its say. And we're not judging, or well, it shouldn't have happened. I should be able to always integrate these. No, they don't need to be integrated because they're already one. They're already one. Every experience already an expression of the one without a second, the one that we are, before we try to name it, that mystery. Does that address your question in any way?
I love what you did with your hands. That was great. Awareness, touching, just touching that which moves and has sensations and jumps around. It was beautiful. It was beautiful, Dorothy. Thank you.
And, you know, one that Adyashanti used many times years ago, I don't know if he still does or not, but, you know, like, this is the contraction. And so in a sense, we're inviting awareness inside, not to look on from the outside, but inside. We're inviting it inside the contraction, not to change it. That's the very big thing. I'm not doing this to change it. I'm just inviting it inside, curious, wondering, not knowing, what is this? What's it made of? You know, and this, you know, and then it just begins to transform from the inside out. You know, so much of the mind wants to just pry this apart, you know. Okay, what are the parts of this contraction and how can I deal with them? And how can I get rid of, you know, just like kind of a more often, not always, a more violent approach. I'm gonna get rid of this. But you see, this is like, it's just gentle, you know. Nice. And there's just a melting. It's not a prying, from my perspective. Anyway, it's not. It's just, it just begins to show itself. Just like the essence of the phone or the glasses or the bow and the candle, it just begins to show itself when we're not separate from anything, really. And to be able to say, I don't know, is a part of the inquiry. You know, it's not about becoming stupid. It's not about not knowing or not allowing knowing when knowing appears. And it's always the dance, you know? I mean, if you work with trauma, then you know there are things to know about it. You know, there are skillful means that some people have discovered of working with it, and so forth and so on. There are people who know how to do that. So it's not about knowing and not knowing, but it's really realizing that there's something in each of us that has a deeper knowing, a deeper intelligence, a deeper compassion, a deeper love. Regardless. It's just not identified as separate. So maybe I'll take just a moment and read a poem, because we were looking at something in our rooms, right? And this poem by Jane Hirschfield is called A Room. And it could be a poem about the space in the room or the space of our own awareness or awakeness. But this is a little different twist, and I just thought it was kind of a fun poem. And she titles it A Room. A room does not turn its back on grief. Anger does not excite it. Before desire, it neither responds nor draws back in fear. Without changing expression, it takes and gives back. Not a tuft in the mattress is altered. Windowsills equally and evenly welcome both heat and cold. Radiators speak or fall as they must. Doors are not equivocal. Doors are not equivocal. Floorboards do not hesitate or startle. Impatience does not stir the curtains. A bed is neither irritable nor rapacious. Whatever disquiet we sense in a room, we have brought there. And so I instruct my ribs each morning, pointing to hinge and plaster and wood. You are matter as they are. See how perfectly it can be done? Hold one more day what is asked. So I kind of just like that spin, you know, even the things in your room are not judging, do you know? The curtains don't care. The floor is still supporting you, you know? And of course, if we go more deeply into the, you know, the space of your room and the space of awareness are very similar. You know, the walls can come down, the pictures can be removed, you know, the radiator cannot work. And still, that space is here and it's awake. It's aware. It's the knowing of experience without needing to put it into intellectual knowing necessarily. So let me just see if there are any other comments or questions that we might engage with, since I do feel like we are students and teachers of one another, and all of us have something to contribute.
Victoria, would you like to share?
Yes, thank you. I find that when I'm completely alone and can sort of settle down, then I can settle into the not knowing and just a kind of pure awareness, and it feels it's an enormous relief because I otherwise live entirely in my head. But where I'm struggling right now, because it's sort of a new experience just to be. Mm. What I'm noticing, and maybe it's because I'm still new to this, is that the second I'm in contact with another person or some external stimulus, I mean, even like right now, being in this group is, now I'm not alone in the silence somewhere, undisturbed or whatever. Then it becomes almost overwhelming. I feel like it's very unsafe for me as in a certain way not to know, and then I get into a conflict if to remain totally open seems like then all of a sudden there's too much. It's hard to explain. Too much not to know and too much to know at the same time. In other words, of course I can't know what, for example, if I'm engaging with another person, I can't know that other person's mind or soul or heart. I can try to read clues and, the usual type of sort of nonverbal communication or whatever. But if I am also in an unknowing place for myself, it just feels it feels like I've been sort of ice skating and all of a sudden the ice has given way and I'm plunging into the deep. And so I'm wondering how to negotiate that balance, because I feel like the way that I'm really healing, because I'm dealing with a lot of trauma that I keep finding more and more the more I dig into my life. I feel like the healing can only really progress well if I stay in complete isolation, but I can't, from a practical point of view, I can't do that. So I'm wondering if you can help me with tools of how to try to preserve that sense of not knowing and being open, and yet be able to engage effectively with others without being too vulnerable.
Okay, that's a big question. But let's start with one part. And you say, when you're in silence and so forth and so on, then things get easier. And a question I would ask, is silence already here, even though you're speaking in front of all of us? Is there something already silent before you think of yourself as trying to be silent? Is there some quiet that's already present?
Well, I can answer you from my head that I feel like silence to me, silence is the ground of all being. It's sort of, silence is what is behind everything and underneath everything and over everything. It's a kind of.
Okay.
So
but that's like know that in your head. I just invite you right in this moment, and we all can join in, to just stop and see. Is something already quiet, present, at peace, before we try to become those things?
I feel like I'm cheating. I want to say yes, of course, but I'm hearing the bird sounds. I'm just now, I closed my eyes and I felt very aware and open, and it felt delicious, but I don't know. I don't perceive the silence.
Okay, well, we don't have to call it that. There's something present. It was present to the bird songs.
Mm-hmm. Right? Oh, like awareness. Okay.
We don't need to put a word to it, because the minute you get it into a word, and there's nothing wrong with that word. I use it, of course, to point as well. But, you said something was here, right here. It felt delicious. I think that was your word. The bird songs were coming in, my voice is coming in, and your thoughts are coming in. And there's something that surrounds and is part of the experience that you're having. See, and when I think I have to be that, now we're back up into the mind that feels like it's separate. I have to learn how to be present or silent or, open or whatever. Is something already open before we're trying to become open?
Mm-hmm.
So part of becoming more comfortable, we might say, or more at home in our true nature, is really noticing that what we're seeking is already here. Now, we may know it to various degrees in different moments, because our attention will move. Our attention will move from, if I go back to my hands, our attention sometimes is here and sometimes is here, The fact that attention's going here doesn't mean that this ever is gone. It's ever present. It's just that our attention has moved. So something sees which side of the coin is up. Sometimes it's this delicious, open, present, mystery part. And sometimes it's the movement of mind, the contraction of the body, the fears that arise and so forth, But the more we can, the more we can stop, even just, just moments, maybe many moments in a day, if we're hoping to become more and more stabilized in the presence that we are, it's just to notice that it's here. It's present to your fear. It's open to your experience. Maybe the experience is not comfortable, or maybe it is. Maybe it's delicious. Maybe it's fearful. But this hasn't really left ever. It's always available because it can't be separated from itself. It can't be separated from its many, 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 many infinite expressions. So that would be one thing, it's like the practice of noticing, is it already here? Because go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, the minute we decide that there's a separate somebody that has to be all those things, it's pretty overwhelming. Well, how can I possibly be, all of those things every moment? How do I integrate this? How do I manage? How do I, how do I balance all of these things as though there's somebody to do it? What if there's nobody to do it? What if it just happens? And sometimes it happens that this is very active, and then there's a moment where, oh my goodness, here it is. And then we get more comfortable, inquiring.
I love the hand thing. This you should do a whole session.
Or when we only can see each other from the waist up, or maybe not even from the waist up, it's what we have to work with, right?
No, it's fabulous though, because I think what I'm seeing in your hands is the moving. I can hear it now in my question, a duality, and then out of the duality, trying to get to the other, what's on the other side, so to speak.
Yes.
What you're saying is let that go and embrace the non-duality, and then there's no conflict or trying to get from A to B or
well, right, because what's not two is never at war with this. In fact, this is how it sees itself. It appears anyway, how do I know really? But, it appears to have form, to create form in order to see itself, to know itself, to express itself, to love itself. All the ways, and it's not just the good, the beautiful, and the true. I mean, this also includes the dark side of life and ourselves, It includes all of it. And so, when we have as an interest bringing everything back into the wholeness of being, then, nothing gets left out. And so sometimes, and you, as you say, as I go along, I see that there's more and more trauma that I'm discovering. I mean, part of that is the movement of love to bring everything back home. You know? And a lot of times, if we've had some big openings, then all kinds of stuff will come up. You know, it's like the shit hits the fan. And like, why is all this coming up? I thought I dealt with it. But in fact, there's more presence available because there isn't so much blocking it. You know, it's always here for this to be able to be seen in the heart of compassion, the heart of awareness. You know, it comes back.
Theoretically, I should be delighted the more more I uncover. It's enlightening.
Well, if it arises on its own, I don't think we have to dig. You know, I mean, that's another thing. Okay, if I just, you know, there's no end, as some of us have discovered. You know, there's no end if we're just digging. There will always be something, you know, in terms of our relative life. But there are things that will just appear, and maybe they'll appear repeatedly, and those are the things that are wanting attention, right? So the question is, what kind of attention are we bringing to it? What kind of attention are we giving it? And if we're giving it attention from this that's ever present, not threatened, compassionately aware, then it's going to soften this. And eventually this becomes more and more transparent. You know, it just gets seen to be what it is and not who we are. Okay, yeah, here this is again, my old friend, you know, I'm afraid of this, you know, it's like, and then we're not so frightened of fear because there's something that isn't threatened by it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Anything else that wants to come into our circle, our rectangle, as it were?
Sid, go ahead.
Dorothy, I had one other curiosity as I was just sitting here listening to you. How would you introduce yourself as the I that you are now?
I don't know. That's the deepest. I mean, some of you are familiar with the story of Bodhidharma, when he brought Buddhism supposedly from India to China, and the emperor, the emperor of China, you know, found out about him, and he came to question him, and he said, "So, what merit have I accrued by all the temples that I've helped to build and all the people that I've helped and you know?" And Bodhidharma said, "You know, no merit." And he was like shocked because he thought, you know, well, if I do all these things, isn't my karma to have a better life if I'm doing good here? But Bodhidharma saw through the egoic grasping. So anyway, then the emperor said, "Well, if that's the case, what is your teaching?" And Bodhidharma says, "Emptiness, nothing sacred." Mm-hmm. And then the emperor was totally confused, and he said, "Well, then who am I speaking to?" And Bodhidharma said, "Don't know." You can laugh. You see, I mean, and he wasn't talking because he didn't have a felt sense that he hadn't recognized. I mean, he'd been practicing for many, many years before he ever went to China. You know, it wasn't that he got stupid all of a sudden and, gee, who am I? I just don't know. It was that he knew that the deepest mystery can't be spoken. It can't be spoken. I mean, that's what the Tao says, the very first chapter of the Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. So how do we get in touch with the Tao that can't be spoken? We have to step beyond the intellect. We have to step into don't know mind, which is an open mind, open heart. And then something may arise, something may reveal itself that you may never ever be able to speak about as though you know it with your mind, and yet it's known. So what's known and the knowing that I can speak of, sometimes two different things. As Adya once said about, spiritual teaching and teachers, we will always fail using words. We will always fail using words. We just try to fail as well as we can.
Can I turn it around to its inverse with the question?
Feel free.
Because what I notice are the eye identifications, or the parts that do their little thing that keep pulling the attention or pulling the eye, or like grab the eye. At this point in your maturation, in the maturation that's happening in you with this awakening, what still, are there any identifications or eyes or parts that come up that still blend or pull you away, or have you identified?
So this is a beautiful example of the comparing mind. I want to know how it is for you, right? That's what you're asking me, and is there still, that's a question spiritual seekers will constantly say, I still have this sense of a separate I that comes up. Who cares? It's only the separate I that's asking the question. Are there moments of identification? Certainly. It's just seen as that, what's identifying is identifying with itself. We think there's somebody here who's doing it wrong because there are these moments of identification. But from my perspective anyway, and there are others who will disagree, I'm sure, but we could say awareness is the mystery, or what's awake, the pure knowing, the infinite potential, blah, blah, blah. All those words are just words. But whatever it is that we can point beyond ourselves to, that's what's moving in the body mind as consciousness itself. So I myself make a slight distinction in terms of talking about awareness and consciousness. Awareness is like electricity, and here the body mind is like the toaster or whatever. It functions based on the power, the life energy that's coming into it for whatever period of time. It's still working, we might say. It's still functioning. And so, this that has come, this that has identified, it's like a to me anyway, it's like a painter that's really identified with one of its paintings, and he doesn't want to give it away. It doesn't want to sell it. It wants to keep it because it's so enamored of it. It's so in love with it. It means so much to it. So, for whatever period of time, it remains completely identified with that. Is that a problem? Only if we're trying to be somewhere else.
Yes. Yes.
So, what happens when awakening occurs is we're brought back to the present moment. And we're not brought back to the present moment in order to make it different, which doesn't mean that transformation doesn't happen, or that we're not moved to address, poverty or racism or, inequality or all the injustice in the world. I mean, we may very well be moved. Truth may move in us in ways to respond to the suffering of the world. But it's not because there's a rejection of seeing what's here. So when you see what's here, the seeing itself is not judging it. And that's the unexpected freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I always thought the freedom would come when this never happened and that always happened, et cetera, et cetera. You know, we have these ideas. But then I would just encourage you, find out for yourself. Find out for yourself, you know.
Thank you. And this wasn't from a place of comparison or judgment or anything. It was really just trying to get at this edge that I'm exploring right now, just to see how you address that and what was going on in your system with it.
Yeah, well, it's being in the moment with what is.
Mm-hmm.
Without thinking that the what is shouldn't be what it is.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't mean anything about the next moment. The next moment may be completely different, or we may be moved to respond, or there may be an awareness like, oh my gosh, this moment really cranked up some conditioning. You know, it really, there was a moment where the mind actually thought, like in my case, that there's a right way to load a dishwasher. You know, that's a stupid little example. But, you know, there's something conditioned. And so if family's over and they're loading the dishwasher and I come back, you know, there's something in me that often will want to change it to make it more efficient, blah, blah, blah. I don't judge that shouldn't be here, but I see that that's a conditioned moment that has no real truth in it. There isn't just one way, you know, there's the way that I'm comfortable with, you know, but there's a way someone else is comfortable with it as well. And so as soon as I think that my way is the only right way, now I'm in separation, right? So there could be a seeing of that or a laughing about that. I mean, come on, you know, this human thing is if you have the ability to find the humor in it, it's kind of fun and funny, as well as sad and tragic. I mean, it's the whole 9 yards, right? It's the whole 9 yards. So I'm not, you know, I'm not promoting a position, and I'm going to talk about this more next Saturday, what don't know mind is not. But I will say it here, I'm not promoting a position of I don't know in opposition to knowing. You know, our intellectual knowing is required for us to function in this relative world. But I don't know is actually a medicine, and it can be used wisely or it can be used not so wisely. But it's sort of a medicine for when we're overwhelmed, when we're grasping something, when we think I have to know here, I have to know intellectually. Do you really? You know? And in life in general, and maybe you can relate, maybe not, but you know, if something comes as a possibility in your life, and you know there's a clear yes or a clear no, that's easy, right? We move on it. Clear yes, clear no, we move. Then there are these moments that are in between where you say to yourself, I don't know. Should I do this? Should I not? Should I accept this invitation? Should I not? Should I? Blah, 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 blah. You know, the shoulds. The question, should I? And you don't know. And the questions, I don't know. And then the mind can get engaged. In some minds it will. Okay, here's a list of why and why not. You know, get in very. But it's simpler. It can be. Let me just say that. It can be much simpler than that. Whereas here, at any rate, there's just a sense of, I don't know right now. It'll be interesting to see how it moves, because life will move, because life is moving us. You know, life is being itself. Being is being itself all the time. And so, you know, eventually a decision will be made, or no decision will be made, and that will be the decision. But we don't have to spend so much mental energy trying to figure it out when we get when we get more and more comfortable with don't know mind, and realizing that don't know mind opens us up to what actually wants to come forth. You know, and from my perspective anyway, you know, the truth in us, it doesn't give us a 10-year plan, you know. It may not give us a 10-minute plan, But what we need to know may not come until the moment we need to know it. And that leaves the mind feeling insecure until it gets used to living more and more in don't know, because that's the truth of our life, isn't it? You know, we don't know what'll happen tomorrow. We truly don't know. It doesn't mean we have to live in fear of tomorrow. It's just, can I get more and more comfortable not knowing? And as we become more comfortable with not knowing, we're more open to what wants to arise and show itself, reveal itself, move itself, respond to itself, and so forth and so on. And there's just, you know, I mean, on Saturday, I want to deal more with how the don't know mind can be such a very great benefit in our relationships. And I'll just tell you a story, maybe whet your appetite, I don't know. But there's a story that came out of from a student at Green Gulch, which is a Zen farm in Marin County in California. And so they're, you know, the students who live there have a place of residence, you know, the student residence. And this is some years back, but apparently the door kept being left open. And if you know where Green Gulch is, it's very close to the Pacific Ocean. And here in Northern California, that ocean breeze can be quite cold at times and, you know, pretty potent. And so this cold air kept coming into the student residence, and people were getting more and more upset about it. And they were having meetings about it, and they were putting posters, you know, by the door, please shut the door when you come in, da 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 da. And they were in the middle of a meeting, and people were blaming each other, you know, it's like, well, maybe it was her and him, da da da, you know, who, I didn't do it, you know, this whole thing, it's got to be somebody's fault that the door is being left open, right? That was the assumption. So they're having this meeting of the student in this residence hall, and they're having a meeting about this door issue, this door problem, when in the middle of the meeting, the golden retriever that lived there at the time had learned how to open the door from the outside and came right inside into the meeting, and of course left the door open. And it's just one example of many, and probably you have some in your own experience, where you're just sure that there's someone to blame, you know, or someone to shame or whatever. And then you find out, it wasn't quite what I thought. Or maybe your partner is late coming home for dinner and you think it's just, you know, being disrespectful and la, la, la. And then you find out they were in a minor automobile accident or something like that, you know. So it's kind of like, can we suspend judgment about anything long enough to become interested when we don't automatically imagine that we know? And then we're open to possibilities. We're open to many, many aspects of life. And we're open to a much deeper and richer experience of life when we come to anything from don't know mind, beginner's mind. So I think we're almost out of time. Is there anything else that wants to come quickly at the end here?
Chantel, do you want to share?
Yes, I would love to, and I can make it brief. Dorothy, thank you so much. I'm so touched by how you're being with everyone. And what I wanted to share that changed is initially, I'm so delighted in the what am I, and I don't know exercise. I loved the deliciousness of getting to not knowing and not really caring. Like when I get there, it feels like home and I feel so free and liberated. And I thought, well, I'm going to wait to share until I have a challenge to share, because that's the best way to use an opportunity to share. And if I can be so bold, and you can stop me if I should, but thank you, Sid, for your sharings, because that really spoke to how I get caught up in there's a problem to solve. And I get unsettled with the deliciousness, like, and all the conditioning thoughts come up, do I deserve, as a Catholic, ex-Catholic, do I deserve, and is it okay, mostly as I'm saying out loud, will I get punished for basking, reveling, and savoring in this delicious not knowing?
I don't think you'll be punished, Chantal. I think you'll experience more and more freedom, and working as I did for more than 10 years with Mother Teresa and her brothers and sisters in the Bay Area, I know quite a bit about, I wasn't raised Catholic, but I know quite a bit about folks who were, and just the depth of fear that can come up when you believe that, something has to look a certain way. And that's true no matter what our spiritual tradition might be. But even those in each spiritual tradition who we would consider the innovators, they're not ones who went along with the dogma. They're ones who wanted to know for themselves. Who's, whether we're talking about the Buddha or we're talking about Jesus or whatever, it's that desire, that movement in us to find out what's true. And if we already have an idea about it, we're not open to finding out for ourselves. And so the spiritual journey is really about finding out for ourselves, not taking someone else's word, unless it's resonant, and then discovering for ourselves, exploring for ourselves, because each of us has our own way of coming into the wholeness and coming into the knowledge of who and what we are. So you don't have to have a challenge to enjoy not knowing at all. I only see your name, but I wish I could see your face. But I would say that to you. Yeah.
Well, thank you, because I'm excited that you'll be seeing my face. We'll be seeing each other's face next weekend.
Oh, fantastic. Great. I'll look forward to it. I will look forward to it.
Because I'm a yes, and if I just respond quickly to what you said, is that I always had a knowing since I was 5 or 7 that even though my dad went to church every day, loved the Catholic Church, I knew that it didn't fit all the suffering and everything else. And not that I knew, but I just knew that wasn't it. And I so appreciate this field that you're inviting us into, of letting what wants to be known be known.
Yes. Let it reveal itself.
And yes, and staying in the not knowing. I'm all in for that. I'm a big yes. So thank you, and thank you, everyone.
Well, maybe that's a good place to stop since we are out of time. So be well, my friends. Thank you, Sarah, for hosting, and until we meet again, be well.